Hello, everybody. Let me just finish up something I was doing to get ready for you guys. Let me just finish up something I was doing to get ready for you guys. Let me just finish up something I was doing to get ready for you guys. Let me just finish up something I was doing to get ready for you guys. Let me just finish up something I was doing to get ready for you guys. Strange, foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes. 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 Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who observes.
How's that?
Foreign. Happy Saturday to everyone who
Are we back to sanity? That is very strange because I did a test stream about an hour ago with the same setup and have not touched anything. And this happened. So I apologize. It is very difficult to do this because if I monitor what's coming out of here, not only is there a 10 to 20 millisecond lag, it can introduce a different kind of feedback. So in general, I only hear what I'm saying in the room, and usually I have an amp. I was trying to use the HX Live with you guys, and it was working just fine. Thank you very much. I don't know. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay. That should be better. I don't know what happened before. Let me try to make this work and, scream if this fucks up again, because I won't be able to hear the difference. All right, so. Is that okay? Is this good right here? All right, I'm going to try adding a track and making it stereo and choosing the output of this. All right, cross your fingers. How's that? Let me know if the voice goes crazy. So we're good? I don't know what happened. And you can hear this, though I can't. All right. Well, we'll get to that. All right. I have no idea what happened with the feedback nastiness. I swear to God, I always do a test stream about an hour before I do the real stream to make sure there aren't any issues. And it was just fine. So let me go to some questions, and we'll get to the pedal stuff eventually, because the response to that pedal board video was, 10 times greater than I expected, which is flattering. Just Drive Sheboygan Falls. I will get to your question, and I am extraordinarily backed up. It is not you, it is me. Let's see. Victor just put a deposit on a Gemino. That's a great amp. Gemino makes great stuff. I look forward to hearing the badass loop that needs guitar and drums, Hillbilly Hunky. I'll have to check that. Maybe slight latency with the video. Well, that varies depending on the internet connection. So it's beyond my control. When I did a test stream, it was totally in sync, and it usually is. Usually it is on these streams, but sometimes it varies depending on the ISP. Hillel. Hey, Hillel. Appreciate that. It's very kind of you to say. So you bought and loved the Vibro Champ Reverb. Good. As I said in that video, once that Reverb DSP card goes south, if it's out of warranty, you may be SOL. The guy who owned the one whose amp I did the video on, that failed, and he's bringing it to me to take that DSP out. We'll see if we can find one, but it's out of warranty, and the Fender Authorized Service Center quoted him something crazy. But if it doesn't fail, it's fine. If it does fail, though, the amp still works. Use a reverb pedal. Your question is, I replaced the speaker with a 4 ohm. My thoughts on any tonal difference between 4 and 3.2 ohm? There is no difference because they're the same speaker. How we rate a speaker's impedance depends on what frequency we're measuring it at. So a 4 ohm speaker is a 3.2 ohm speaker. If you notice, a lot of Celestion 16 ohm speakers actually are rated for 15 ohms on the back by Celestion because they measured it at a different frequency. There's no difference between a 15 ohm and a 16 ohm or a 3.2 ohm and a 4 ohm. And if you measure a speaker which says 8 ohm, depending on your meter, you may read everything from 6.2 to 8.4. Typically, you're going to measure things below 8. From like 6 to 8 will be the range your meter pick up on an 8 ohm speaker. It's always just kind of an approximation because speakers do not have the same impedance at every frequency, but that's a very different, deep, and long subject. The 10A 125 is a fantastic speaker. That's a really nice choice. I will say, though, that for a champ, Vibro Champ kind of thing, you're going to lose what little power there is with a Alnico speaker. Typically, I would suggest a ceramic for that. So that would be the 12F 125 or a 12F 150 if they offer one. Let's see. Hey, Brian, can I explain how the Koch Jupiter 45 or other similar hybrid design amps work? If one were to use this as a second amp stereo with a normal tube amp, would there be any latency? I am unfamiliar with that model of Koch, whatever. I'm just going to call it Koch. I'm unfamiliar with Koch, that particular model at least, so I do not have any good information to give you. Sorry. If I ever do encounter one, I will have an opinion. If you mean that it's a hybrid design and that part of it's digital, part of it's analog, would you be concerned with the latency? Typically these days, the digital stuff, the latency is in the order of 1 to 2 milliseconds, and that is the difference between being a foot closer or farther away from your speaker. So odds are you won't notice that. The issue is when you have a whole bunch of digital things, each one of which adds 1 to 2 milliseconds. If you have a really big rig, you can get closer to 10 milliseconds. 10 milliseconds is about the smallest interval of time the human brain can consistently perceive. 10 milliseconds can be annoying. It'd be like standing 50 feet away from your amp, and that's an approximation. I have not done the math, but once you're really far from it, you will hear a delay between what you play and when the sound reaches you. But most people are 3 to 20 feet away from their amp. Every foot can be represented as a number of milliseconds. We don't perceive all those things most of the time in performance. Hey, Jeff, that's a good deal on an AC-15. Hope you love it. The Vox AC-15s, especially the C, is a really good amp. There is a series of caps that can sometimes fail in those if they have Leon caps. That's seems to be a batch thing. Some batches use them, some batches don't. It's not the end of the world. They're not terribly expensive to replace in that. And if you have the ones, I don't remember what brand it is, the ones that don't say Leon, they tend to be great. And the tubes they ship with tend to be pretty bad. So it's not unreasonable to need to change tubes on one of those. But once you do, they will last. And it's a really nice sounding amp, especially for $400. Coffee and practicing bass. Nice, Lou. Hey, Alex. Hey, Rob, Dustin, Captain Sexy 90. Okay, Tucker, more bean juice, please. Ugh. All right, now I'm to the audio loop runaway comments, so I'm going to skip through those. Sorry about that. I look forward to hearing this back to see how awful it was. I did not mean to do that to any of you. I had no idea. And let me know if it happens again. The voices, they are gone. All right. Sorry again. It's really tricky to monitor this. Big channels, there'd be someone sitting over there with headphones on and the computer running everything, and they'd be monitoring everything, and they'd be feeding me all the questions and telling me what to say with teleprompters and iPads and everything. It's just me here, seat of my pants, and if that kind of thing happens and I can't hear it, if I turn on my speakers, so you might hear what I'm saying here. If I turn on my speakers, so you might hear what I'm saying here. If I turn on my speakers, you see why I can't hear what I'm doing in real time, because that is how an easy way to create the problem. Mr. Buttons. Hey, Mr. Buttons. Thank you very much. He's got a new Headstrong Lil King, basically a black-faced Princeton. There's a distorted signal underneath the clean signal, even at a very low volume. I replaced all the tubes. Any thoughts? I would have to have your amp on the bench. That is not a behavior I would typically associate with a Princeton, and I don't want to theorize and worry you too much. I would contact Headstrong and say, hey, I bought one of your amps. I love it, but it's doing this. What can you do for me, or what can you tell me to have done? Give them a chance to support their products before if you bring it to me and I'm like, oh, it's just this one little thing, no big deal. But if you bring it to me and something's wrong, do you want to pay for a full recap versus them doing it? It might be, and this is not a slam on Headstrong or any company. It might be a bad tube. You said you've changed those. Might be another bad tube. It might be a bad cap. Sometimes in production, we get bad batches of components, and sometimes they work fine for a week or two, the time that we have with the product, and then out in the wild, it has a premature issue. The test of a company is not whether they can make everything perfect and bulletproof and never have a problem. The test of a company is what happens when there is a problem. So give Headstrong a chance to be an excellent company there. Let's see. Hey, people from all over the world. This makes me very happy. The something went wrong screen, huh? Did anyone else get a something went Went wrong screen? I don't have any of that here. Huh. Thanks, D-Mac. Appreciate that. Yeah, I thought that'd be something that maybe 1,000 people might watch over the course of a month, but it's #1 on the channel right now. So I'm just going to be doing everything about pedal boards and HG stomps now, because obviously that's that's what the demographics say. You got to chase the algorithms. Let's see. All right, cool. Almost to the end of the sound check. And Just Drive Sheboygan Falls. I would love to work on your 63 non-reverb deluxe. I will check the emails for that. Sorry, I am constantly playing catch up with emails because I'm constantly behind the 8 ball on work. Like on the 63 Princeton that's here, the non-reverb Princeton. Ordered the parts for a week and a half ago. They showed up yesterday afternoon right after as I posted the video complaining that parts hadn't arrived. In this case, I'm going to give the vendor a break because odds are everyone's computer from between him and me, or them and me, was blue screening. So, you know, even us perfect people have the occasional computer glitch, computer glitch, computer glitch, computer glitch, computer glitch, computer glitch. I will look for your email. Thank you very much, Just Drive Sheboygan Falls. Hey, Louis, or Louis, if you're up in Montreal, I bet it's Louis. Any comments on PRS guitar amps? Yeah, they that's a terrible sentence. They vary very wildly. The David Grissom stuff, phenomenal, really great. I've not tried the HX. I've not been inside the HX20. They're older. I think it was HX50. You know, the Fillmore thing that they did was really, really good. The custom channel 2-channel C and custom 2-channel H were really not good. The Archons are really not good. So it really depends on the model. But the DGT models, or whatever they're calling the Grissom amps, those are really well built and designed. The C and the H and stuff, there's just too many puzzling decisions. I'll just say that, as far as 1N 9418s where 1N 4007 should be, and it looks like an eyelet board, but it's really a very flimsy PCB with fake eyelets, etc. And the voicing is not very good, and the noise floor is not very good, and the ground scheme is not good at all. So I think Doug Sewell, who designs at least the really good stuff, knows exactly what he's doing, but I think there are some communication errors or compromises made in certain production lines to get to a certain price point. And without knowing Doug and knowing what's going on behind the scenes, I cannot comment further. Hey, Clyde. Yeah, I've played some Ernie Balls. They make some fantastic, they have really fantastic ideas. They make some really fantastic guitars. Typically, all the necks are way too small for me. I have tried the Silhouette. I've tried the Van Halen, which later the Axis. I've tried some of the other stuff. I even tried the one for St. Vincent, because they had one at a store and I was curious. And they all feel like really excellently made electric ukuleles to me, but I've got unusually large mitts. But they really do play excellently. They are built fantastically. They can look fantastic. If one fits you, that's great. Go for it. There's absolutely no downside to Ernie Ball guitar, unless you're like me and I'm playing my Ernie Ball. Hey, Nick, Sarah. If it's frozen up, deoxit and fader lube is your best bet. If it it could be rust on the outside, like on the bushing. You could also get it on that side, maybe with a little bit of WD-40. But try the deoxit first. But sometimes pots fail, and it is better to have a current production pot that works than a vintage pot that doesn't, just because it's old. I say that as an old person myself. There are parts of me that are probably in need of replacing at this point. I say that. I'm only 50. When am I, 53 this year? It doesn't feel as old as I thought it would. I watch TV shows, and there'll be this little old bald guy in there. Oh, he's 55. I'm like, he looks 10 years older than me. Maybe it's his mental outlook. I don't feel that I'm old yet. I'm just gray, and I have wrinkles in odd places. But other than that, I wake up every morning. I'm 28 until I look in the mirror, and that just bitch slaps me. Reality. Let's see. Can I use a normal reverb vibrato pedal for a Princeton 2? Yeah, of course, Warren, you can. Princeton 2s have other issues, but if you can get a basic clean sound, yeah, use all kinds of pedals work with that thing. Hey, Luke, I've not encountered any conductive silicones for this. I use non-reactive RTV silicone. It is made by Permatex. You can get it at most auto stores like an AutoZone or O'Reilly or Pet Boys or whatever you have. I guess Pet Boys is not one of those. Anyway, you know what I mean. They also sell it at Tube Depot, and it does not react with plastics while it cures. Yeah, you can also sometimes find it in pet stores sold as pet safe, aquarium safe, because it's used to glue fish tanks together. Hey, Elliot. Yeah, bias modulation tremolo is tricky. He wants to know if I can go into more detail about dialing in the bias modulation tremolo and getting rid of clipping. I've had challenges even when going cold on the bias. Yeah, you will have clipping in most bias modulation tremolo. You don't get it as much in the AA. Is it 864 Princeton? I can't remember. I can never remember the Princeton, the 60s Fender Princeton with reverb. You can see that they have a 22 to ground after the 100 nanofarad output, which is going to the intensity pot, and that is dumping a lot of that hash out. You can put a 2.2 meg resistor between the bias side and the wiper of the pot. That mostly just protects the output tubes. Should that pot fail, you still have a connection to the bias. The other thing you can do, though it's outside the scope of this chat, is you can do reverse diodes, which can help with that clipping. But there is a reason the bias tremolo was considered kind of a budget thing. It has drawbacks. If you get an older one like a Gibson GA18T, it's going to have a lot of artifacts. I think the best, as in least objectionable implementation, is the 60s Princeton. Look at that, and if you have a different one, look and see where it varies. You may just want to change it to the Princeton one. You will get a better result with fixed bias than you will with cathode bias. That's part of it. And that's part of what makes the Princeton work so well. But there's always going to be some kind of little artifact. You know, the Sir Bella has the same thing, as does the 62 Deluxe over there. They have the artifact. The other trick is as you turn the speed up, the artifacts get worse. So turn the speed up, turn the depth down. As you turn the speed down, turn the depth up. You can find kind of the sweet spot where the artifacts are there but not really objectionable. Hey, Paul, my opinion of EV speakers. Someone just offered him an EVM120S for free. Well, a free speaker is good, and if you don't like it, that EV can open a really heavy door. I find the EVs are overhyped. They sound wildly different from each other. You can have 5 EVMs or EVLs, and they all sound very, very different from each other. I don't know if that's batch to batch or year to year, or if they intentionally made changes. You will also find, through hard experience, a lot of Fender amps, especially the 70s with the chipboard, dado glued-in baffle, those baffles are really not good places to suspend EVs and JBL D120s. That it's really the hard knock life for them, and they don't hold up to it typically. So try it, see what you think. If you are pairing speakers for your Dumble, you can afford to buy a whole bunch of EVs and sort out, oh, I bought 10, these are the 2 I like, and this third one's my backup. For the rest of it, you may spend a lot of money on a speaker, find it hard, brittle, unforgiving, and think, well, everyone tells me I should like this, and I paid a lot of money, so I'll just learn to live with it. Whereas other speakers will make you happy. Remember back when EVs were getting very popular, JBLs, there weren't as many options to the average player. There was what came in your amp, and there's what came in your amp if you paid extra for the JBLs. And then there's the EV option. That's pretty much it. Or there was the stuff that's sold out of the Radio Shack down the street that might work. Let's try it. So we have a lot of good choices today. And if you're watching this and your sound is an EV, you are absolutely right, and enjoy it, and more power to you. Hey, get the lead out. How much less of a concern is lead dress in the phase inverter and power supply when B plus is less than 300? Thinking Gibson GA5T, but with push-pull output transformer. My test turret board is getting crowded. I feel like similar point-to-point layouts get away with murder, especially old Gibson ones. The concern is the same no matter the voltage. The concern there is not going to be the voltage being dangerous or things arcing so much, is that you will have hum. The good news with the phase inverter and the good news with the power supply with a push-pull output is that you can take advantage of common mode cancellation. So what would have been noisy in a single-ended amp magically can be quiet in a phase inverter. Like in a phase inverter, you don't need to twist the heaters going to it. You don't need to twist the heater wires going to the power tubes in a push-pull, because any noise injected from the heaters on one tube, that same noise is injected on the other tube, and they're out of phase with each other, so the noise cancels out. Same thing happens with the 2 triodes of a long-tail pair Schmidt phase inverter. Not the same thing with a cathodiene or a paraphase, but when designing a new amp. Hey, Jeff McErlane, you generally would... I would suggest a long-tailed pair Schmidt phase inverter for almost everything, unless you are going for a specific kind of character and you know the downsides and you know how to mitigate them enough to make it work very well. Hey, Fountain Bird. He's looking to build his first pedal. I was thinking about trying something similar to the Jam Rattler circuit. Does that sound reasonable as a first build? Well, as far as I know, hey, Keith. He's changing the strings on his Southern Jumbo. I need to do that too. Maybe I should go get my Southern Jumbo and change strings with you here. The Rattler, as far as I know, is a rat, basically. It's a rat with some changes and an added switch. I don't think it... given how good a rat is, I don't think it can be a bad choice for a first build. I know that if that floats your boat, that Aeon Effects, AIONFX.com, where I got the boards for the pedals I make, they make a rat kit, and I think it even has some suggested mods like a mid switch or whatever. You can also buy a rat used for like $70. One of the best sounds I've ever gotten in the studio back in the days when I was doing stuff in the studio was a 68 Les Paul Custom with DiMarzio. Let's see, what were the one? Was it Air Norton? This was like 92, 93, so I think it was the Air Nortons in it. Might have been. I don't remember. It's one of the DiMarzios where every bobbin had every there was all the Allen adjustments on it. On every pole piece was an Allen thing. into a Rat, into a Marshall Blues Breaker, and it was mic'd up with a 421 on the speaker, and it was at the end of a long hallway, and about 30 feet away was a U67 up in the air, and that just sounded like God. You just bring in the close and the distant fader until you dialed it in. It was one of those magic things. And if someone said, "How'd you get that?" "Oh, I used a Rat," people would be like, "Oh man, a Rat? I need something more exotic." A Rat into an amp that's really alive can be a fantastic thing. So yeah, a Rat or the Rattler circuit ought to do you. Hey, Greg G, I've never tried the Celestion Ruby. I hope it's great, but I've not tried one. Hey, 1217 Productions. I don't know what the AC15WB is. Vox keeps coming out with new versions of things. If you love it, then it's a good amp. And outside of the creamback, is there anything different? I don't know. But if it's got a creamback, AC15 into a creamback, hopefully it's a 65, though the 75 is not bad. AC15 into a creamback 65 is just a perfect recipe for, so many great music, so many great recordings, so much great music can be done with that. You can do U2, you can do Radiohead, you can do Physical Graffiti, you can do Yardbirds. I mean, that's just, and you can do, you can play some blues and people will think you're in Chicago. It's a great combination. Hey, Strum Bum. I wouldn't worry about over tightening if you're going to 74 deluxe reverb the rattles when hitting bass notes. Does it rattle if you take the chassis out of the head, out of the cabinet? You need to make sure, am I hearing cabinet rattle or chassis rattle or tube rattle? So if you take the chassis out and put it on the floor on a bunch of towels 3 feet away, upside down, so the tubes are pointing up in the air, are you still hearing rattles if you run an extension cable to the cabinet and speakers? Because on the 74, the baffle can actually come loose. It's a glued-in baffle, and sometimes that glue breaks, and the baffle is just sitting in a slot of wood and can move around. And sometimes you just need to get in there with some super glue or some added cleats. But unless I had your amp in front of me, I couldn't really point you to anything else. It's really hard to over-tighten anything except wood screws. Be careful with that. Hey, 1217 Productions. He also picked up a 1990-ish 59 Bassman reissue with about 3 or 4 hours playtime on it. Eminence Blue Frames, great speakers, really great speakers, and a solid-state rectifier outside of filter caps. Anything else to be done to it? Well, funny you should ask. I happen to have some videos up on the 59 reissue Bassman right now. I've got 2 up already, and a 3rd will be coming. And see those videos for more details. But on the solid-state rectifier is a tricky one. I'm trying to remember if the earlier ones just don't have. I think yours has a socket for a rectifier tube. It just has a little plug in it, right? Little diode plug in it. The voltage in the amp is way too high, especially with the GZ34, and it's tremendously slow with a solid state with diodes. The trick is to put in a 5U4 GB and then rebias the amp, and you'll be seeing that in part 3 of that video. But look for the videos I have up on the 59 Bassman reissue amps that are up and in progress right now. Hey, Cody. Struggling to find this answer. Adding a 16 ohm output in addition to the 8 ohm out on a deluxe reverb. Is it easy? A new output transformer has 4, 8, and 16 ohms. No, it is not easy. You cannot have a 4 ohm output a 16 ohm output at the same time that you have an 8 ohm. Whichever tap is being used, 16, 8, or 4, whichever one's being used at that moment is the one that's being used. So when you use the 8, it disables the 16. Think of it that way. The negative feedback can still be connected anywhere you want, but as far as using it as a speaker load, that's it. You make your choice. The good news is if you have an 8 ohm load and a 16 ohm load and you want to use them both at the same time, The load is I think it's like 6 ohms, so you can use the 4 ohm output or the 8 ohm output. It really doesn't matter. It's going to be fine. There's just not any real risk to a mild mismatch like that. So if you have a 16 ohm cab and an 8 ohm cab, you want to use them at the same time, and you've got 4 and 8 ohm taps, run them both. Listen at 4, listen at 8, see what you like the sound of. Whichever one you like the sound of better, that's the right one for you. It won't hurt it. Hey, David Mayer. He says, I mentioned in the past how bear traps help with assorted tube noise created by external sources such as Wi-Fi. Is that true? And if so, could you briefly explain how that works? Not bear traps. Bear traps don't do anything for that. Bear traps just keep tubes from wiggling around, especially in a loose socket. It's the shields. Let me get one. It's the shield, like this, that goes on most preamps, that goes on a bayonet base, slides down, turns, pops on there. A tube has parts of it which are at ground, typically, or close to ground. But if you surround the entire tube in a Faraday cage, which is what this is, once it's connected because the chassis is ground, then you have a very thin layer of air between the elements, well, actually between the glass and the Faraday cage, but depending on the part of the tube, there can be a varying distance. It forms a little bit of a capacitance, and you can hear the sound get dark. If you touch it with your fingers before the tube, if the tube's not too hot to touch, you can hear that same thing with the capacitance. So there is a trade-off. You won't have quite as bright a sound with a tube shield, but it will block a lot of outside electrical interference because it's shielding. The signal is going through that tube, and this shields that part of the signal. And in our world today with Wi-Fi routers and cell phone towers and phones, that can be very important, where it would not have been that important in 1965. So if you have a tube which can have a shield, try it both ways. Most of the time, I will tell people if you're in the studio and you have a quiet environment, take them off. You'll get a little bit of extra high frequency response and clarity with no noise floor increase. But I would rather have a subtly darker response from the tube and then adjust with the treble control on the amp to get back to where I want, while having no outside interference, than to have a naturally brighter sound without one of these, but always hearing stuff in the background. That's my Wi-Fi impression. Do you like it? Let's see here. Let's see. Hey, Strumbum, I think you asked the question twice, and I'm not singling you out, but if everyone can only ask questions once, it really helps. And if you can put a question mark at the beginning of your question, it helps it stand out so I see it better. For instance, Hillel's telling Greg G he's got a deluxe reverb reissue limited with the Ruby, blah, blah, blah. Not blah, blah, blahing you. But I have to read that to see if it's a question, and it slows the entire thing down. So if all the questions have a question mark ahead of them, it's much easier. Thanks, Matt Johnson, about the pedal board video and the Mouser stuff. Hey, Drake Harris. You're very welcome. See right there, I had to read it to see if it was a question, and I do appreciate it. But I try to get more of the questions from you guys than compliments to me, except for when it's really important. Thanks, Keith. Keith and I are watch geeks together. Hey, Juan, what was the known issue with some Marshall JCM 2000 DSLs? Well, it's a two-part answer. Number one, it's not some. Of the actual JCM 2000 DSLs, it's about 99%. The board self-immolated because the board material was crap and was conductive, and it took them 17 to 20 board revisions to get it fixed, and they charged customers for it, and they did not do a recall as any other manufacturer in any other industry would. So some DSL 2000, JCM 2000 DSLs is about 99% of them. The other part I want to mention is that Marshall has a current amp called the DSL 100, which is not a JCM 2000, has nothing in common with the JCM 2000 DSLs, and does not have the bias drift self-burning mode of the old JCM 2000s. So when I slam the old DSLs and TSLs, that does not include the current production DSL 100. So if you have one of those, don't panic. If you're considering buying one, they're pretty good for the price. But the old JCM 2000s, garbage, hot garbage. Marshall should have been sued, class action suit. It's really hard to sue someone who doesn't have any class, though. Hey, Mark, I don't have any experience with the StewMac kits. I think that they're partnering with Mojotone, which would make me think that they're good. I would be very concerned about a 62 plexi, though, as there were no plexis in 1962. But I'm going to assume that was a nicely intentioned typo. It happens to all of us, even me. Hey, Greg G's got a 583 and uses a Mojotone cabinet. The two back panels rattle. Any tricks or hints to deaden those two rear covers? Well, the bottom panel shouldn't rattle. That should be pretty tight fit. Make sure your screws are in there all the way. If the top one, typically if you get the woods, the trick with most tweeds with the top rear panel, is with the panel off, have the two or three, depending on the model, screws which hold the chassis to the cabinet almost but not completely tight, especially since you have hopefully Kep's nuts on the two that hold the chassis in place, so you can tighten it up just using gravity to hold the nuts in place. Put the rear panel in place and then push, gently but firmly push the chassis up against that panel, and then tighten the screws from the top, and that kind of locks the panel, locks the chassis to the cabinet with some pressure on that panel. If that's not enough, you can go to the hardware store and get some very, very small foam insulation that's sold for windows, like really narrow stuff, like a 1/16 of an inch, and it'll compress and fill up the gaps but be invisible when everything's put together. But that's rarely that necessary. PJ, playing a tube amp with the back off for sound preference safe? Anything to think about first? Just use to open back cap. Open. It's fine. If you like the sound, it's fine. Won't hurt a thing. Be aware of it if you're moving the amp. If you take the amp to a gig, don't throw it in the back of the car without remembering, hey, those tubes will get exposed. Just take care. And remember that they get hot and don't reach around and grab them. But beyond that, the rear panels on amps, like a Marshall head with the rear panel, that is there just to protect the tubes in transit and to look cool. Hey, Bert, he's got a low-level hum on a JCM 900. It's on the power side, non-amplified. It's messing with his OCD. All caps replaced. Okay, well, there are a couple issues on the JCM 900. It depends on which model you have. Most of the JCM 900s derive the bias from the HT supply, and they are doing that with a capacitive coupled bias supply. And I won't go into great lengths, but it's typically a 0.47 microfarad cap, which then has a 56K resistor to ground, and then the diode, and after that it's kind of a typical Marshall with 10 microfarad to ground, negative, then 15K, then 10 microfarad to ground, then like a 25K in series with a 47K or a 33K, whatever. But the important part is that first cap, that 470 nanofarad cap. It's barely rated for the AC, which is across it, and those fail in JCM 900s all the time. So you can have a bad bias issue, and that's the beginning of it, is that you are getting that low-level hum. So I always replace that with a new X-class rated cap in a 900, and I replace it with one rated for much more AC than is present there. And there are some Mauser and DigiKey which fit the existing space. Don't use an orange drop, get an X-class because it's going to have high voltage AC there. The other issue with 900s on the preamp board, and this can affect the output even if you have all the masters off, is that there are some little bridge rectifiers which love to burn the board on there, and once that happens, all things can go wrong. So make sure you don't have any toasty bridge rectifier. They're little round ones typically on the preamp board, but check the big. It's usually a big gray square box right over by the bias stuff. That's a good place to look. I would be more specific if I knew which model you had. Let's see. Greg G. Question is hum in a deluxe reverb. Just a fact of life. Mine's quiet up to 3, but the noise increases with reverb volume. It's not as noisy as single coils in my house. Should I obsess? It's tricky. I can make a deluxe reverb really, really quiet, but there's always going to be some white noise and some degree of hum. Is this a real one or a reissue? If it's a reissue, look at my videos on how to rewire the V3, the reverb send driver tube, because they wire that wrong from the factory. Pardon me. Beyond that, it can be lead dress. If it's getting really noisy, it could also be a bad tube, either V3 or V4, or it could be a bad reverb tank. In general, I can get a deluxe reverb to be quiet until about 9 on the reverb circuit. So it's not something you have to live with, but it's very common for there to be some level of hum. Kimball Ormsby. Brad likes the AC-15. He just ran into 3 which had a bad batch of caps, but he liked them previously very much. And I don't know how frequent or how common an issue that's going to be. It might have been a batch sent out to the 240 volt countries that I have not run into. Anyway, sorry, I'm seeing 2 screens at once here. So I would not obsess about it. It's not as noisy as the single coils. That's good. Remember that reverb tanks have essentially single coil pickups in them. First thing to do is make sure your tank is installed in the amp correctly, where the RCA jacks are facing the speaker, not facing the rear. I have had so many Fenders come in where that tank was just installed backwards, and it's a lot noisier than it should be. So check that first, and make sure you don't have your deluxe reverb with its reverb tank isn't sitting 3 feet away, even on the other side of the wall from like a home security system, because those things put out all kinds of noise fields that reverb tanks can actually pick up quite nicely. Thank you. Oh, he's listening to the Wisdom here while changing his strings. Well, you're shit out of luck there. Sorry. Keith, I can never promise wisdom, just the occasional goof. And I like having the freedom to make occasional goofs in public. Hey, Bottom Kitchen. The white Bronco. I don't know anything about that, 1217. I don't have any opinion about the Celestion Alnico 100 motor amps. Sorry, I have not run into that one yet. The largest Alnico I've used is 90 watts. Hey, Brooks, would I recommend any particular speaker for a single speaker cabinet? It depends on the size of the cabinet, depends on the size of the speaker, and what genres are going to be played. So for a bass speaker, okay. Especially for bass, the speaker is a secondary choice. The cabinet design, the whole thing has to be designed together. You can have, someone can say, I hate I love 15-inch speakers for bass only, and they have their favorite 15-inch speaker cab, and someone brings in a little 4x10 or a 2x12, it just blows out of the water because the design is better. And then they go and they say, okay, well then I want a 2x12. So they go buy a 2x12, they buy a different 2x12, and it doesn't have a good design, and they're not happy. Then they hear someone else with a phenomenal sounding 15-inch speaker because the cabinet was designed really well for that, and they say, I was right to begin with, and they go back to their old one, and they suck. There's the thing that people are aware of, and there's the thing that it is actually making something good or bad, and they're not always the same thing. So you can have, if you find a cabinet builder whose work you really enjoy, play their 15, play their 2x10. I'm sorry, their 2x12, their 2x10, their 4x10, their 12-10 combo. The important thing to learn is to disable tweeters. Beyond that, once you find someone who makes a system that you like, ask them what speakers they like, and see what if you agree with them. All right, good. The plug-in rectifier will change out the plug-in rectifier for a 5U4GB, but you can check out those videos I've got up. Let's see. Hey, Brian Caps. You got a bad 6CA7. Best to track a set down or go with a EL34 retube. I would have to consult my data sheets because I don't remember the trick with 6CA7s right now, if there is one. I don't think there's any trick to them at all. The important thing to remember on a trainer is good trainers separate pin 8 and pin 1. So pin 1 is shield, and they'll have that at ground. Pin 8 is the suppressor, and rather than have that at ground, or rather having that at any kind of I'm not phrasing this properly. They'll have it connected to the raw bias supply. So they want it more negative than ground. So you have pin 1 grounded, and pin 8 might be at negative 50 volts, negative 55 volts, whatever the raw bias is. And that's a big part of the trainer thing. So whether you have 6CA7s or EL34s or KT66s or anything, it's that trainer connection on the suppressor grid that makes a bigger difference to make it sound like a trainer. So, sorry, I just had to get my mind wrapped around. For some reason, because you had CA in lowercase, I didn't realize what tube you're talking about at first because I'm used to singing it 6CA7. So the 6CA. By the time I got to the A, I'd forgotten where I started. I'm oddly terrible at sequences of numbers and letters. Let's see. I am unfamiliar with an Ampeg VL1002. Sorry, Greg G. It's okay, Strumbum. Moki, points of failure on an AC15C1 that the owner can address, pretty much tubes and making sure all the hardware is tight and the input jacks are tight. That's really crucial. You might want to have the 470 ohm screen grid resistors replaced with 1K to 1.5K or even 2K. I've not had too many failures with the 470 ohms that are in there, but the larger resistance is better. But I wouldn't necessarily bring it to a tech specifically for that, but maybe if something else is being done, have them do that at the same time because it takes like 10 minutes to change out those two resistors. There's some other things that I do that I cannot tell someone how to do in the space of this kind of thing. But if someone said, "Hey, here's a Vox AC15C1, you got to use it on stage in front of people tomorrow. What do you do?" The first thing I do is just make sure all the tubes are good, and I make sure the speaker hardware is tight, and I make sure that all the cables going to the reverb tank and all the connections are clean and secure. And I make sure the input jacks are tight, because if those input jacks get loose, you get all kinds of weird noises and buzzes and points of interference. I think it's almost time for us to take our first intermission. My bladder says it is. Let's see. I have seen really good stuff on AX84, and I have seen utter nonsense on AX84. This is kind of an in-between thing because it'd be very difficult for a typical single-ended amp to really fully supply the current needed for a KT88 and cathode bias. KT88 is really not a tube that you'd want to use cathode bias for. You can do it, and that's what they're doing there by giving it a 15 watt bias on a 42 watt tube. I think that's what that works out to. You know, that's like 40%, so you're way down in the coldest range. It's not going to be drawing as much current as it would in a normal amp. You're going to be getting crossover distortion, and then you couple that with it's still going to put out more than 15 watts, and it's going to be hitting that transformer real hard, so you're going to get compression artifacts and saturation from that transformer. That is a color choice to make because you're going to be running a tube in really the nastiest possible operating conditions for that tube, but it will be safe. You know, there are things in this world which sound bad that we love. Listen to Brian May with his Deaky amp. That's a terrible sounding little amp. It is an utter piece of garbage that works perfectly for that one thing, and that one thing in context is magical. So I think this is that kind of thing. It's just a very expensive way to get there. Mark says they call it the 62 Brit Plex. That's curious to me, but you know, they can call it whatever they want. They just mean it's a JTM. It's going to be some kind of JTM 45 thing, unless they're talking about the Marshall 1962, which is the Bluesbreaker combo. Anyway, the Mojo Tone kits are really good quality, and I think the StewMac stuff is much the same. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and then we will get to Strumbum's question about his 74 Deluxe Reverb, and I will see you guys in about 7 minutes. All right, let's see. I got a question here from last week left up. I'm going to take that off and put this thing up that I'm supposed to remember to do, and I never do. And then I always talk about how I do it, but I never do it, but I always forget. So before we get to the questions, I want to show you some problems I'm running into trying to make peace with digital amps. And I was going to have the editor up so I could put it on screen for you guys, but I think that's what caused the feedback loop we had at the beginning of the stream. So we will not, in fact, be doing that. I'll test that later. So right now I've got the Eric Johnson Strat tuned to E flat, 10 to 46, pretty standard stuff. I use this on the channel all the time. It sounds like a Strat. Sound even better if Jeff were here playing it. But so I've been experimenting with the digital amp modeling this thing offers, and I've got a Princeton kind of dialed in, and a Deluxe kind of dialed in, and a Twin. I still really need to play with their cab modeling and mics. Each one of these has got the appropriate cab for the model with the U67 and their software. It's close, but I'm not thrilled with any of them. Here's the Princeton. And I'm really not happy with the spring reverb yet. I'm still trying to play with that. Here's the Deluxe. Here's the Twin. Deluxe. Princeton. Each one of them annoys me in different ways, but ways that the real amps never do. And the spring reverb sounds really good for some stuff, but if you hit it hard, it sounds like delays as opposed to spring reverb. So the search continues. Before I go in here and do a video on this, I want to make sure it's not user error and that I've not overlooked anything. Two things I've found which help. First of all, you have to abandon the concept of what the amp really is and how the things that it says it's doing, what they really are in real life. For instance, all the amp models sound a lot better if you add very mild compression to the very end of the chain. I'm using the LA2A compressor. Just bringing down the peaks by about 3 dB at the very most, typically more like 1, because otherwise this stuff gets, oh, you're hearing the click of the pick after the amp sound? All right, well, see, I don't have the, everything I say through here, there's got a certain degree of lag. Everything I play with this does not lag, so it's not gonna sync up perfectly. Sorry, I got to play around with that. But anyway, when I do that, if I turn the compressor off, it's big spikes. It's unnatural. Amps compress. Their amp models, at least their clean amp models, don't seem to compress. The other thing is the dry sound sounds weird. I'm talking about their dry sound with a mic. It doesn't sound like a mic'd sound. So I've added a very subtle room reverb at all times. Let me turn off the plate reverb real fast. No, sorry, taking off the spring reverb. So this is the core sound of the amp now. But and this is not me comparing this through monitors at 70 dB or headphones to an actual Deluxe reverb or Princeton or whatever over there at 90 dB. This is having recorded an awful lot of the actual amps. So I think it's a really good practice tool, but it doesn't really come close. I've just been playing with the Fender amps to begin with. I'll try the Voxy stuff. I'll try the Marshall stuff. This is without trying any IRs yet. Maybe an IR makes this better. And Jim Cox says if you have a Tone X, it'd be interesting to hear it from models and the HX Stomp just for effects. That might be something I go to down the road if I find that I need to have digitally modeled amps beyond practice. For practice, this is pretty damn good. Just kind of, okay. Let me go to the Deluxe, which I think sounds more the closest of the three. Let me show you some of those pedals from yesterday. So here's the modified Klon. Now the issue is that into a real amp reacts, or a real amp with that going into it reacts very differently than this model does. Here's the Zen Drive. It's like there's a little sizzle riding beneath things with the digital amp that I don't get with the real one. And here's both of them stacked. You get that little fizzy thing riding beneath it? I don't get that out of the real amps. If I turn on one of the stomps in the stomp, this is their version of the Noble's OD1. It sounds really pretty good. It's interesting to me, and we're done with this, by the way. It's interesting to me that the models in the Stomp sound really good into the Stomp amp models and almost as good into a real amp, whereas real pedals, which sound fantastic into a real amp, kind of seem to be torturous for the Stomp. And I'm using these barely above unity gain, so it's not like I'm slamming the input the way I might an actual amp. So I'm going to come up with some stuff to use, because it'd be nice to be able to eventually get to the point where I can do things like Jeff does on his channel, you know, not as well with the playing, but like, okay, here's how you get that Clapton sound, here's how you get that whatever, you know, if you're going for this kind of thing, not here's how to sound like Stevie Ray with digital effects, but if you're trying to get this kind of vibe, that kind of vibe, it'd be nice to have examples that I could do on a stream without, you know, having things at 100 dB right over there. When I do an edited video, I can do that. I can say, hey, and here's a Strat into a Deluxe Reverb on 4. It's going to be 100 dB in the room. You know, that's what that sound is. And I mic it with a 57 and a Royer, and you get a very accurate version of that on playback. But for live, that's really not feasible. Anyway, so maybe my jury will come back with a different verdict as I get to know the gear a little bit better. There are certainly tricks to it that I did not anticipate, because it does not do what it says on the tin. And if you try to approach the stuff in there as if it's really what it says it is, you'll get terrible results. Anyway, back to the question. Strum Bum. On the same 74 Deluxe Reverb, I got that reverb sizzle on the low notes per one of your older videos. Springs are stretched, so I need a new reverb tank. Very possible. Do I still recommend the MOD medium decay tank? I do, but my preference of the tanks on the market right now would be the medium decay that Mojo Tone sells. And that's not because I love Mojitone more than I love any other company, though the guys there have been very nice to work with. But I think that the specs that they have on their medium decay Fender style tank are slightly better, and it's certainly not quite as dark as the MOD. The MOD would be my second choice. My favorite sounding tank made today is the Surfy Bear, or whatever it's called. Is that what it's called, Surfy Bear? But they're having them made by Belton, and so they're not going to last. They're really poor quality tanks. That's not Surfy Bear's fault. That's Belton Accutronics' fault. Hal Hawkins, heading to Mart Music. Let me know if I need to pick up anything for me. Yeah, you need to get a set of 9s for when I change the pickups on that Strat for you. And, if you want to swing by Quick Check, you don't need to do that, Hal. Let's see. If I'm going to use extension out on a Princeton or Deluxe speaker, should I disconnect the main speaker? Can you run both the external cab and the amp speaker at the same time? You can run both as long as the impedance doesn't go crazy. So you don't want to run a 4-ohm cab and the 8-ohm cab at the same time. But you can run 2 8-ohm cabs or an 8-ohm cab and a 16-ohm cab at the same time. Basically, the output transformer of a Princeton or a Deluxe can handle a 1-to-1 mismatch. So you can have a 4-ohm load, an 8-ohm load, or a 16-ohm load. You don't want to go lower than 4. You don't want to go higher than 16, but that's very rare these days. Mark, sorry, got to go get the pork shoulder going. I will be back. Well, that is a very good reason to be away, but only if you brought enough to share with the rest of class. Does the speaker placement matter in a 12-inch baffled reverb? It won't really matter where the speaker is in the cabinet that much in that design, because the cabinet design is such that no 12-inch is really going to be at home there. There's just not enough internal volume. I would have to look at both to tell you why they might have made that choice. The main issue with the Princeton is when you put in a 12-inch speaker is you don't want it to hit the speaker frame. You don't want the speaker frame to hit the output transformer, rather. And so sometimes if you go to one side, you have a little bit better odds. Hal, if you're serious, I'll take a double meat gyro, no onion. I'll get you back too. I will change pickups for food, man. That sounds awesome. Thanks, Chris Allen. Appreciate that. I missed a question. Yes, I did. Sorry. Bert Rodriguez. Bias 4.7 cap replaced to 630 volt WEMA. All bias section updated. All right. Okay. It's not a 4.7 cap. The cap I'm talking about is not a 4.7 microfarad cap. It's a 470 nanofarad cap. And is that 630 volt WEMA? I imagine that's 630 volts DC, and probably closer to 240 volts AC, which is not enough. If you have the Hummer main with the phase inverter out, it does not go up with volume. 2 things to check. First of all, 3 things. 3, sir. Make sure that cap is the correct 470 nanofarad, 0.47, not 4.7. Make sure that it is rated for, I would say, find something that rated for like 400 volts AC. Second of all, I think the 900 might have that stupid cap between the screen and plate. If you're looking inside the amp over at the very left, I know the 2000s do. I think the 900s might have that cap. It's a picofarad value cap between the plate and screen of the leftmost tube, and the 500 volt caps that they use always fail, and the switch is either to replace them with a 1000 volt cap or just to remove that stupid cap that does nothing for you. But that might just be on the 2000s, not on the 4101. I don't recall. The other issues beyond you could just have a bad transformer is if you have you looked at all the solder joints on the output board where all the speaker jacks are, it's very common to have bad solder joints develop on that. And you can have cracked or burning joints on the impedance selector switch, and they normal the ground to the 8 and 4 ohm taps through the 16 ohm speaker jack, trusting the normaling of that jack for all the ground current for 4 or 8 ohm use. Is that right? 4 or 8? It might be 4 or 16. I don't recall. I think it's 4 or 8. And the fix there, I've shown this in a lot of my videos, is to add a 18 gauge bus wire across that normaled connection on that speaker jack. These are the things I would look at first. Let's see. Hey, Mickey. Do I think I can hear a difference between different capacitor brands in the signal path, or is that mostly hype? No, I can't hear the difference between different brands. There are some places in some circuits where I can hear very subtle differences in materials, and I've done as close to true blind testing as one person can do, where I made basically decade boxes for these things. Ulcer bomb comment. I'll get to that later. Sorry, Rob. So I would have 10 of the exact same capacitance cap on a switch, and the only variation would be the material. And I would play and then turn the switch and then play and then turn the switch and play. And I didn't have a labeled, Sprague, Vichet, WEMA or anything like that. It was just A through G. And I had in a notebook what those were, but I didn't remember what they were at the time. And most of the time I'd be like, yeah, don't hear any difference, don't hear any difference, don't hear any difference, don't hear any difference. Sometimes I'd be like, whoa, that has a slightly different feel. Okay, so A and D have a slightly different feel from the rest, and A and D are more similar than the others. It's subtle. Or when it might turn out after the fact that A and D were polypropylene, the others were polyester. Later, it was mostly the differences to be found in picofarad value ranges, bright caps and treble caps and stuff like that. So when comparing 500 picofarad caps, oh wow, yeah, I'm beginning to hear a real difference, especially if there's one where there's voltage across it. I'm beginning to really hear a difference here. I'm like, okay, I could categorize these into 3 different kind of feels, or it's almost like changing the pick out, whether you have a very round, smooth pick or a very pointy pick or a raspy pick. I'm exaggerating for effect, but it could be consistent. And those consistencies would be like, okay, the silver micas generally have this kind of feel and sound. The films have this kind, and so do the polystyrenes. The ceramics can have this kind of sound. The ceramics can also have this kind of sound. That's kind of harsh, brittle sound I don't like. Okay, that's the really cheap one. After the fact, I'd find out what it was that I was hearing. Some places in some amp circuits, you just don't hear any difference at all. Other places, it's minor. Other places, like, whoa, that's really affecting the character there. And when you make decisions cumulatively, you can end up with an amp where everything cumulatively sounds very different than if you'd done the entire amp with everything else. But it's not necessarily brand, and it's not necessarily metallized versus true film and foil. I think that I've not found that all metallized caps sound the same. I've certainly not found that all film and foils sound the same, and some film and foil sounds exactly like some metallized. So it's a very long answer to say yes. In some situations, I know that I can hear differences. I don't know that I would be able to say that's I know that I could not tell you, hey, that's a 715p or that's a 716p. But in certain parts of the circuit, I could say that sounds like it might. I think that might be a polyester versus a polypropylene. But everyone can be fooled. That's why I did it blind. It took bias out. It took any expectation out. But it's mostly hype. It's most people bragging, whipping it out on the online table, so to speak. Hey, Lou, you're talking about the video Yeatsy did with the old leaky Astrons. You thought it's not bad. Well, the thing is, you're not in that video. You were not hearing the old leaky Astrons. There's a video that my buddy Yeatsy did where he had changed out every capacitor in a 1961 concert or something like that, or Basement. I don't remember what the amp was. All the Astrons were leaking, so he changed out all the Astrons. And then he did a comparison, changing just the 100 nanofarad base caps on each channel between the old Astron, a new WEMA MKT 1813, and a new Jupiter. And changing one cap, mind you. And it was the cap that sent some of the signal to the base pot. Not all the signal went through that cap. It's a fairly moderate effect on the sound, one base cap. If the capacitance is correct, they're going to sound mostly the same. And very little voltage present there in that tone stack, like 200 volts. People magically in the comments ascribed all these qualities to them, so that, the Astron sounded better, or the Jupiter sounded better, or my God, I can't believe how nasty that amp sounded with that MKT 1813. And I listened on my studio monitors, and I've actually done that test in real life. And in that situation, if the caps have about a 50% tolerance compatibility to each other, because it's a bass cap and a bass tone circuit, you're not going to hear any difference unless the cap is failing. If the Astron's leaking, that Astron wasn't leaking because it never had high voltage across it. People hear what they expect to hear. I have actually done that kind of test online for people back when I had the Facebook page, and I would upload the exact same audio clip 3 times in a row. And I would add a second or a half second of silence to the end of it, so each file size was slightly different. And I named them, hey, Amp A, Amp B, Amp C. And I'd sit back and read all the people tell me how wonderful Amp B sounded, how terrible Amp C sounded, how they could see themselves using Amp A in a pinch. They were all the exact same recording, digital, save as, ha-ha 2, ha-ha 3. And people will hear what they expect to hear, or if they've spent money on something. So if you've paid $8 for a Jupiter cap, you're going to hear at least $6 of improvement over the $2 WEMA. There are other parts of that amp where if you changed out 4 caps at once, you might have actually heard something. But what really amazed me was that one cap in the bass circuit was a modern WEMA, and people called that amp sterile and harsh. And you change that same thing to another cap, and people love the sound of the amp. Every other cap in that amp was a WEMA MKT 1813. Every other coupling cap in that amp was the sterile, harsh, modern cap. And that's not how it works. One capacitor being magically good cannot undo 20 other capacitors being sterile and harsh. So, very flawed premise. Sorry to get on my soapbox about this. And this is something that I talked to Yeatsy about. And this is not saying he was wrong, because he didn't express his opinion. He pulled the string and watched the internet go, which is fun. Hey, RC, Bob C. from B-Town, Bakersfield. Wow, I got guitar cables everywhere. Roller chairs and guitar cables are fun. Hey, DS, no, the Custom 64 Princeton and the Custom 64 Deluxes are ripoffs. Just get the 65 reissue and mod it. Get it used for $800, $900. Put $200 worth of reliability upgrades into it. put a $100 or better speaker in it and go gig with it. You'll be thrilled. Yeah, Bert, you ran into the 4101 bridge rectifiers before, yeah. Hey, Bayrov, with this record-setting heat, I worry about leaving my amps and pedal board in the garage for storage. Is my equipment okay in 100-plus degree weather sitting unused? No. Now, some things are fine. The chassis are fine. The tubes are fine. The stuff inside the chassis tend to be fine. The Tolex, the wood, the glue, all the plastics, they won't like that, especially on a pedal board. Your Velcro will just start to melt. If you have Velcro or dual lock, the adhesive will start to melt and run. And you don't want to have humidity either. So brief moments in a car, brief moments in a garage, fine. But you don't want extended. If you're hot, they're hot. Let them in. Try to keep it within a climate, temperature, humidity swing range that you would be comfortable in. I mean, they're going to be fine in a dry 100-degree place, but they're not going to be happy, or the adhesive won't be happy if it gets to be 30% humidity and 110 degrees in there or more. I don't know what that is in Celsius. Freaking hot. 40 degrees? Yeah. Anyway, let's see. Thanks, Hillbilly Honky. My audio always sounds great. My setup for the live streams is a 57 on this shock mount with this windscreen, and I spend most of my time speaking 45-degree angle, so the plosives go past it. If I want to go in here and do the whole podcast thing, I can do that. I can also do and we're going to spin the groovy sounds of the late night jams. But so I'm running this into a Moto M2 mic pre. I've got the gain up at 3 o'clock, so quite a bit of gain, but it's got a low noise floor. This is going straight into Logic, and in Logic I've got the Shep 73 plugin, which is really not doing much. It's adding a little bit of harmonic interest, and I'm scooping out 600 hertz just a little bit by about 2 or 3 dB, because my voice can be a little bit boxy at around 600 hertz with a 57. And then I'm using an R-Comp compressor plugin for about 3 dB of compression with a very slow attack and a medium release. So I want it to be very even, but if I move around a little bit, that 3-to-1 compression really helps even things out for you guys out there. And then I've got a limiter that won't let the output of Logic go over 1 dB, which means I won't get any clipping going into the streaming software I use. And I set the streaming software so I peak about -2 if I really were to be loud. And that seems to give a pretty good consistency from system to system. I know that if I could have someone go out to like 3 or 4 different cars and report back to me as I'm speaking, I know I could probably tame some stuff around 80 to 100 hertz a bit more than I have. Right now it's flat, and I've got a high-pass filter set in the Shep's thing about, I think 100 hertz. On the produced videos, I do it slightly differently, and I have a more complicated high-pass filter setup. In this, I just have the set and forget. Thank you for saying that, though. Hey, Randy Steffs. He's building a fuzz. Do I need to isolate the input and output jacks from the chassis? Any other thoughts about grounding and pedals? Oh, well, how much time you got? Fuzz is going to depend on whether it's positive or negative is ground. It gets complicated in fuzzes. Fuzzes and other things, which, NPN, PNP stuff. In general, you would always want to either isolate the output from the chassis and have a wire going from input through everything to the output jack, but not having that output ground going through the chassis as well. Or you would have the output jack tied to chassis and not have a wired ground to the output jack, just trusting that short run from the input to there. But the better way to do it is to have the input jack tied to chassis, the output jack isolated from chassis, and have a ground path that goes from the input jack to the switch through all of your audio circuitry in a steered path, and then out to your output jack. And at the switch, it would have an alternate path for ground. That's the best way to do it. It's not always feasible. But when you get into the difference between there's ground, there's AC negative, and there's DC negative and DC positive, and I'm running out of fingers. They're not always the same thing. It gets very complicated with certain fuzzes. So take what I said at the beginning here as just kind of a general principle, and it works for amps and pedals. You want to have the shielding right there at the input. Blocks all kinds of stuff from going through. You don't want to have any multiple paths. You don't want to have any loops. And it's best for everything to go in a certain flow from beginning to end. And you separate your shielding from your audio grounds, and then be aware of your power stuff. Beyond that, I can't really go into much detail here because it would just be the fuzz podcast. That might be fun to do someday. Just do like 2 hours on one topic. It would give me a chance to prepare for that one topic and have like charts and graphs and proof of what I'm saying, other than the fact that I am saying it. Yeah, like you said, when I was doing that, I'm going to be listening back to this to see how it works. The syncing is difficult because I'm running the processors on the voice, the compression and the EQ and stuff. So there's a delay introduced there, and I've got the video and the mic synced pretty much, or it usually is, and I'm sure that the guitar is going to be ahead of that. Because, I'd have to go in there and add a delay to the guitar. Once I get everything else worked out, if I say, all right, I need to add 24 milliseconds of delay for the guitar to be perfectly synced, I'll play with that later. There's so many things to juggle. Hey, Zapruder Pedro, 2203-2204. Can you explain the trick involving use of a stereo switching jack for the low input to switch the V1B cathode resistor? You had mentioned it on Jason Tong's channel. Thank you. Yeah, if you use a stereo switching jack, it can be Neutrik, it could be Cliff. There's a tip, there's a ring, and a sleeve, and there's a tip normal, a ring normal, and a sleeve normal. And if you use that for the low gain inputs, you can set it so that the minute that a guitar cable is plugged into the low gain input, by which point the ring will be tied to ground because you're using a mono cable guitar plug. Once that mono plug comes in, it will tie the ring to ground. And at that point, the ring being grounded, that can be a ground for the cathode of V1B. So if you have in the amp over here the 10K to ground from the cathode, I would do it this way: from the cathode to ground is 10K. You can also have a wire going to the input jack, which has, say, a 4.7K resistor in parallel with a 10 microfarad cap or 1 microfarad cap, and that's the value of the cathode that you want in parallel with that 10K when you're using the low gain mode. Well, that will only go to ground when something is plugged in there. When nothing's plugged in, the ring won't have any connection to ground, so it's just floating. You plug a guitar in there, all of a sudden that new resistor and cap are in parallel with the 10K, and 10K and 4.7K is like 3-something K. And so you have a 3K resistor, or whatever you need to do to get it to 2.7 or whatever you want it to be. You can use a 1 microfarad, a 0.68, whatever cap you want the bypass cap there to be, a 10 microfarad, and dial in the amount of low end and boost you want there. That's going to give you a lot more gain, a lot more low end, and a lot more of a traditional plexi feel than you will have out of the standard clean channel of a JCM 800, 2204, 2203. And it's easily done. And you can do all kinds of variations on that. The thing to remember, though, is that you will have a pop when you plug into the low gain input, because that is, you're changing the bias at that point. So this is not a, you're unplugging from one channel going to the next one. It's a JCM 800, it's not channel changing, so to speak. So you would need, every time you have to unplug from one to go to the other one, you're going to have that kind of issue. So just one thing you just know, put it in standby, plug into the low gain, take it out of standby. No one heard that pop. There are ways to do this with channel switching. You can ways to do this, relays and optos and all kinds of stuff that can be implemented into this idea. But this is a really easy way to change out a $2 part and all of a sudden have a much better, frankly, sounding clean channel, low gain channel, just by a resistor, a cap, and a different jack. Hey, Jimmy Mac. He's working on a 50 watt plexi build. Should he use Rubicon or Nishikon caps rather than F&T can caps? Also radials for bias. If you're building one and you have the ability to use radial caps, use radial caps. And Nishikon and Rubicon and Panasonic are all much higher quality than any axial currently on the market, including bias. But if your build necessitates using axial caps or necessitates using multi-section can caps, go with the F&Ts for the multi-sections. You can go with the F&Ts for large axials, Vichy for the smaller values and smaller voltage ones. You hear the. Sorry, I'm responding to the next question first. Yeah, but in general, when you can use a radial, use a radial. Yeah, that sizzle on the drive, Bert. That was into the digital model. It's not there on the actual amps. So if you look at last week's stream, well, it wasn't a close mic on the amp. I was running the same pedals into a 58 basement, and that sizzle was not there, or the sizzle was different. Hey, Dustin, yeah, you can change the input impedance of the HX stomp. I've got it set to just stay at 1 meg. You can make it change depending on the whatever pedals first in the line, or to change whenever a certain pedal model is engaged. But for right now, as I learn it, I just have it set to 1 meg input, just like an amplifier. So if it's not behaving, if I have it set up to emulate a Fender Deluxe Reverb with just the amp, the cab, a little bit of reverb, and a little bit of compression, and it reacts so very differently to an overdrive pedal than a real Deluxe Reverb, and the input is set to be the same input impedance as an actual Deluxe Reverb. I'm thinking that either there's something else that's wrong that I've not found yet, or I'm doing something else wrong. But in this case, I'm pretty sure there's something else wrong that needs a workaround that I've not discovered yet. And it's frustrating to keep finding things that need workarounds with this thing. But, I'm also one of the hardest people to please with this kind of thing, because this is not, oh yeah, that sounds like what I remember Fender sounding like, and I've only heard them on records, or the one I played was old noisy. Wow, this thing's so great in comparison. I'm looking over, there's a 66 and 67 and a 64 super reverb. So right there is what people dream of. Now, they're not mine, and they will sadly be leaving me at some point, but I could be playing those instead of this. And there's an instant gratification thing. Just plug into that thing on 2, and the world is a good place. You plug into this, you're like, I'm aware of that it's not really the sound I'm looking for. It's very intrusive. Now, I've not played around with all the models yet. Maybe there's something in there I'll get to, like, oh, yeah, okay, I don't have to look anymore. That is a great clean sound, and I don't care if it's not the clean sound of a Vox. And I don't care if it's not the clean sound that ever said Fender. That is a really usable musical clean sound. I can turn that on, and I can play and not think about, wow, I wish it wasn't quite so and with the and the you know, you can get really analytical on this thing, but you know, it's literally my job. Yeah. You got some Dr. Pepper to try today. Well, Dr. Pepper is a good thing if you grew up with it. I like the diet Dr. Pepper myself these days. Thanks, Chris Depew. I appreciate that very much. It's very kind of you. Let's see. Trying to get to the next questions. Here we go to Chris's question. I was going to say real fast. I have thoughts about the Tone X. We'll do that in another thing, or maybe I'll do a video on that. I don't know. There's something about everyone having the same sounds and not being able to vary them that much from that. I can see a very beige future in that direction. Anyway, I'm getting fuzz trailing the notes on a Super Reverb 1968 AB763. On a scope, it looks like crossover distortion. Any recommendations on how to get rid of it? Fizz, not fuzz. The first thing, Chris, I would look at it is the filter caps. That's very common. And then after making sure all the caps are good, I would want to make sure that all the resistors are actually good, because there are resistors in old Fenders that measure fine when the amp is cold, but in use you may not have good experience with, where it can, you measure, hey, that's a measures 107K, that's supposed to be 100K, that's got to be good, right? But you can actually trace, if you get the scope, you can say, okay, that's where that is. That is not behaving correctly at XY frequencies. So the trick is you don't want to just shotgun something. You don't want to start changing out everything in hopes that you find it. And you don't want to disturb a whole bunch of stuff that's original that doesn't need to be disturbed. Make sure you don't have any DC leaking on the board. Make sure all your solder joints are good. Make sure all your tubes are good. Make sure your filter caps are all good and your grounds are all good, especially on a 68. All the main grounds of that amp are going to be made to the transformer bolts. And those things are notorious for coming loose, for breaking, for getting dirt between the chassis and that stuff. So check all those things and then report back. I'll be glad to try to step you through this thing, but those are the things to check out. And it looks like crossover distortion on a scope. That could be any number of these things throwing it off, including oscillation that you're seeing the effect of, but you're not hearing. So you pretty much have to say, if I inject signal here, is it clean? Where do I inject signal in the circuit and all of a sudden it's dirty? And that's when you can find it. Hey JF, from an amp tech standpoint, which lunchbox amp is the best designed for blues tone and serviceability, and which to avoid like the plague? Well, I don't know that any of them are designed for blues tone. I'm not quite sure what blues tone is. And serviceability. None of them are designed for serviceability. All of them are designed to have a lot of features in a small thing, and to be fairly easy to make. That kind of negates serviceability. That said, the stuff that Victory makes is infinitely better than the old Vox Night Train stuff. The Night Train amps, the 15 and the 50, were just hot garbage inside. So I would avoid those. I'd be cautious of some orange models. Other orange models, not so bad. The Victory stuff is really good, but it is not eminently serviceable. But it's one of the trade-offs. You know, it's better, more serviceable than any Mesa made since 1976. Blues tone. What is blues tone? If you look back to those old recordings, a lot of those guys were using just a clean Fender, and a lot of what you're hearing is a ribbon mic and a tube console with everything going through one Fairchild limiter and then being pressed onto wax at crazy levels. So I think we have a very strange concept as a culture of what blues tone is. And then there are those who think that means Gary Moore, and nothing against Gary Moore, but that was much more of a hard rock thing that he played blues with. I don't know that any lunchbox will make you sound like Stevie Ray, and Stevie Ray would have sounded like himself through a JC-120. So it's tough to say what blues tone is. And I'm not singling you out, JF. I'm not mocking you. It's a hard thing for an amp guy to deal with, because people will say, I want blues tone, and you give them something that sounds like Jimmy Reed, they're going to say, no, I want my money back. That doesn't sound anything like, Bad to the Bone. Like, well, that's what Jimmy Reed sounded like. It's what Magic Sam sounded like. It's a fun thing if you're a music historian versus a reader of Guitar World. Hey again, Chris. Have you ever had problematic Fender eyelet boards? No. I've had a couple where there's just problems that were mostly heat related from things burning where I had to replace it. I don't know what your issues are there and what level of stray DC you have. You can have DC, I can measure DC in the air. Right now, I'm measuring no DC in the air. There are days in Memphis when it's so humid I can measure like 12 to 14 millivolts just like this, just in the air. So it's hard to say that you will ever have an amp where you don't get any measurement. And a lot of times you'll get a measurement, it might be like 24 millivolts, but all of a sudden it goes down. Did I say milliamp before instead of millivolts? I meant millivolts. But you can also put it on a eyelet where a treble cap is going off to the tone stack, and you'll get like really briefly like 20 millivolts, and then it goes to zero. And you just can't chase your tail on everything. If it's 30 millivolts or higher and it stays there when you're measuring it, that's when I worry about it. So let me know below what you're finding. Let's see. Hey, AT Mandragon. I have no knowledge of or experience with the Ibanez TSA 15H or any other Ibanez amps. Sorry. ADV, what circuit is a Bassman 10 1980-ish, and my thoughts? I would have to look at the amp because there's so many variations. And the Bassman 10 is not a very desired amp. I believe the Bassman 10 was just one of the ones with the interstage transformer instead of a phase inverter, just to save money. And they're basically a very clean version of the traditional Fender 60 circuit, just without tremolo and reverb. They're okay. I could see it being a good pedal platform with some tweaks, but a lot of wax to get rid of to get there. So if you already have one, maybe worth making better, not worth finding and buying one. Where to get good shielded single conductor wire, Jeb Trilio says. Well, for most things that you're doing, I've become a big fan of the Canare GS4, and I also like stuff I have, which I can't get to right now, which is 22 gauge Teflon shielded stranded stuff that's sold as like an RG series. like you'd find for internet stuff or cable stuff. But it's not RG174. I don't remember what the number is that gives you a 22 gauge center connector instead of like a 26 or 28 gauge. A lot of the stuff sold as shielded wire for inside an amp or a pedal is so small that it'll break. Any tugging of the wire or just the weight of the wire can break the connector off. So I really like to have the larger stuff like the GS4 or Tom K1TL saying that I'm talking about RG316. I hope he's right, because I can never remember that kind of stuff. Every time I just call the vendor and say, yeah, it was that 22 gauge stuff. I want some of that. Because you really want to have the center conductor be a little bit rugged. Otherwise, it will break. But the easiest stuff to get probably would be Canary GS4. It's a little bit larger than some of the coax stuff, but it's not that big, and it's a little more difficult to use because you've got that center. It's got that black coating over the center conductor that you've got to strip that away because it is conductive, but that gives it really great rejection. It's really a good shield and very great in terms of capacitance and microphonics. Let's see. Thank you, Bert. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Now, Kay Tucker, I've got a question for you. I believe it was you who said on the pedal board video this morning, that's great until your knees change. And I was hoping you could explain that. Your knees change? Did you mean needs with a D? Emmett Otter, I do not know if the 12x7 caps in your Hughes and Kettner tube factor pedal will last longer than they would in an amp. It depends on a lot of variables, and it depends on whether the tube factor actually runs at any kind of substantial voltage, which I do not know. A lot of tube, Kay Tucker, thanks, Kay. A lot of tube pedals or marketing tubes where they're being run voltage and current starved. Hey, Vern Brown, no. AC doesn't have polarity. AC doesn't have a positive and negative. So until you connect AC wires into a rectifier, for instance, and then you say that one's going to be feeding that side, that's going to be feeding that side, there is no difference, and they're interchangeable. So the two browns are just fine, are exactly the same. The two yellows are exactly the same. The two reds are exactly the same. Let's see. Thanks, Captain Fineweather. Appreciate that. Strumbum, I do not use an exhaust system while soldering. I've got a fan I turn on most of the time just to blow it away from me, but it's too late for me. Save yourself. I think it's a bit overblown a risk for me. I think if you have a whole warehouse full of factory people doing different kinds of soldering all day long, OSHA demands it, but I don't think that I am at the same risk. Wayne Wagner, I apologize, and I don't mean to be mean, but no, I have no interest in working on any more Rivera-era Fenders, Super Champ, Concerts, Pros, etc. They just need so much work to get back to where they should have been to begin with, and I'm not interested. Sorry. Thank you. I don't think you did the super chat thing wrong, Chris. But everyone still say hello to Chris. Apparently he's a noob. Hey, noobs mean that you're new here. That's great. It means you've joined us, and I appreciate that very much. I do appreciate the super chat. Hey, Ryan B., you've installed a Metro Effects loop after the master volume in your amp, but it's a bit noisy, even in line mode. Any way of reducing noise without moving it to before the master? Well, in general, you would want it before the master so that you have a consistent level being fed to your effects, no matter what level the master is at. Right now, with it after the master, if you turn the master down, your effects are not going to get the same signal-to-noise ratio. So that's the reason you would typically want it before a master. As far as the performance of your Metro effects loop, I would contact George Metropolis, who sells that kit, and see what he says. And he's got an entire Metro Amps forum full of people who will probably be able to steer you right on that. But I've installed approximately one of those, and I thought it was fine, but I didn't have any issues, so I didn't pay that much attention to it. But George has great support, and it's a good circuit, and it's very easy to set it wrong because it has send and return trim pots, I believe. In general, you want to have a Metro effects loop or any other effects loop before a master volume, so your effects levels are not changing all the time that you turn your master volume up and down. What's my opinion on the Gibson 15 RVT Explorer amp? Any mods or improvements I can recommend? Unless they've come up with a new one, which they might have done with their whole Mesa thing. I'm talking about the old ones. And the trouble with old Gibsons is they're like 10 different amps that all have the same model number. And they all came out within 3 years of each other, and none of them match the schematic. Gibsons in general are really good copies of Fenders that have had some weird things done as far as ground decisions. They're notorious for having this brown plastic glue adhesive used copiously, and that stuff can become conductive and make it very hard to work on things. They can also have two-sided boards where half the components are on the other side of the board, and all those components on the other side of the board are either electrolytics or film caps that all need to be changed out. So they can be difficult depending on the model. And if your version of the RTV Explorer has what they call the T filters, every one of those should be removed pretty much. Those T filters just neuter the amp. Yeah, like Lou said, thin and trebly. But yeah, you remove the T filters from any old Gibson. You get the grounds good, you get any conductive glue out of the way, any old leaking film caps out, change out the electrolytics. They're really good amps. They used to be pretty much the same as the 5E3 Tweed Deluxe in a lot of ways. Not that particular model, but the GA18T. But they would be a lot less than the Fender because people wanted the Fender, not the Gibson. Now people figured out about the Gibsons too. So, hey, Brian Felmuth, he's about to build a 6G3. Should I add grid stoppers and/or screen resistors to the 6V6s, or leave them out as originally designed? You can leave them out and then just see if you need them. The grid stoppers are mainly going to prevent oscillation or instability or noise at the input of the 6V6. Some people are going to experience noise without them. Some people never will. It's going to depend on the electrical environment you're in. It won't hurt to add 1.5Ks to the grid stoppers. You probably won't even hear that they're there, but you might hear that they're absent. I would start by leaving the screen grids out. The resistor, which serves the place of a choke in that amp, is also giving you screen grid resistance already. The only advantage to adding them is that it separates the role each tube plays. It kind of separates the tube from the B+ a little bit. It can be good, but first build it as designed. See if you like it, and then try some. You can tack solder in some grid resistors, see if you like that. It's going to be your amp. Is it important to you to make an amp that you love and will use, or an amp that's exactly like someone 60 years ago drafted on their bench and put in production? It may be that you like the 6G3, but hey, you love the way it got spongier when you added the screen grid resistors. So play around with it. You can't hurt it. Hey, Doug Crawford, I don't think of the Black Star. Black Stars are junk. They have, well, the artist or artisan line are pretty good, but most Black Stars are not that line, and they're pretty much disposable landfill stuff. I don't care for them. Hey, General Ethos, General Sir. He was thinking about installing the RSD sound bias mod kit on his Blues Junior. Is that something that will make it easier to adjust the bias on? I will also replace electrolytics, etc. Well, it might make it easier to adjust the bias. I don't know that it's necessary to adjust the bias on those things. In general, I set it, 24K, 24K, or 22K, 22K, and it ends up about negative 12.5 volts. And pretty much every EL84 is in a much happier place there, between 50 and 60% dissipation. And I don't think there's any real advantage to changing that at that point. But if you want to install a bias mod kit, as long as you do it properly, it will make it easier to adjust the bias. I just don't know that it gives any real big benefit in that amp. Hey JF, I have no experience with the Music Master Bass 6v6 edition, so I don't have any recommendations. Sorry. Douglas Crawford, it wasn't a bother. I just, there are amps that I'm not interested in working on, and all the 81 through 95 Fenders pretty much had that list, which is a shame because Fender was the best company in the world for amplifiers for so long, and then they just nosedived off a cliff. I don't know why. And it's not Paul Rivera. Paul's a great designer, and he makes really good amps. I think it was cost-cutting, poor implementations of the designs he suggested, or the things he really wanted to do not being approved because they would, quote, cost too much. If you look at what was happening with Fender from 81 to 83, it's amazing they stayed in business. And they got a lot better, but it took them a while, and it took the amps longer, and then it took the guitars to get better. Chris, that is all we can do. Keep fighting the good fight. Yeah. I'm glad you moved the transformer grounds to chassis. Parallel caps across old filter caps won't always reveal. And it'll tell you if something's just dead, but it didn't have any. But it won't always reveal a problem. But it's tricky. It is tricky. Son of Pyro, thank you, sir. He's enjoying his twin sister, an ACC 30C2 in stereo. I don't know anyone in Colorado. I'm sorry. I've had some people from Colorado send me things, but I am far away, and I am very busy. But if anyone here knows of a good tech in Colorado, let Son of Pyro know. Thank you very much for that, sir. I appreciate that. Twin sister would be a good match with AC30 in stereo. Just the Marshall thing and the Vox thing, they pair well together. Da pork is smoking. All right, Mark. Cool. I miss Firesign Theater. I really miss Dr. Science. Do you remember Ask Dr. Science, Ked Tucker? David Chaffin asks, of the big amount kits, stereotone, monotone, I guess you mean mojotone, etc., is there one that seems better than others in terms of the quality of parts and instructions? Thanks. I don't know because I don't build kits. The kits that I have had come in were kits where people tried to build the amp and they ran into something and they brought it to me to fix. And I have had some moments of true despair looking at the instructions that came with some of those kits. Some kits no one could ever build an amp successfully from. I would say Weber's at the bottom of the list. I have had no experience with the new the new Stu Mac kits. Mojotone has improved an awful lot as far as the quality of their instructions has gone up, certainly in the past couple of years. The kits have always been good quality. The instructions did not always used to be quite so. Tube Depot has fewer kits, but the ones that they have very good documentation and very good components. Cherrytone, Seriatone. I'm not a fan of most of the parts that they send as far as things which are labeled Seriatone. Hey, it's an electrolytic cap. It's got orange plastic on the outside that says Seriatone. I don't know what that is underneath there. I know that they have had some bad IEC receptacles and have some bad fuse holders and bad switches. Conversely, other things that they use have been very high quality. I don't know if the transformers are going to last. When I have had Seritones, and the Seriatone is built, they have been very well built. Kits, I think anyone building kits should start with a very simple amp and practice, and by the time that they are ready to build a more complicated amp, they are less likely to need a kit to do that. They're more likely to be able to, and more likely to be wanting to choose their own components at a certain point. So I think we're going to take our next 7-minute intermission now, because we went a little bit over an hour, and my bladder says it is time to take a break. So always listen to your bladder. It is wiser than you are. Chris's super chat got to pew pew. Pew, pew. Ryan B, yeah, that is a carryover from old 50s hi-fi stuff, but you might like it. Try it, won't hurt. There is the realm of what is safe, and that's the realm I primarily concern myself with on my channel. And within that, there are all these different ranges that are of the subjective. And one person's vanilla is another person's lemon sorbet. I don't know what they want. Crunchy frog. Spring surprise. But, as long as it's safe, try whatever you want. Neil Stephenson had a late 90s Prosonic on the bench and found it interesting that there's a 4.7 microfarad, 500 volt cap on the screen supply side of the choke. Is it necessary? Thank you. I would have to have that schematic in front of me. And are they doing standby after that point or something? Or is it, because normally that would be just in parallel with whatever the choke capacitor is. But they might have done that to give it a constant, some amount of capacitance, some kind of voltage present, even when the standby is engaged. I'd have to look at the schematic. If it's in there, I would not be in a hurry to remove it. But I'd have to look at the schematic to tell you more. And I don't know if we're going to have time for that today. It depends on how many questions come in. I wish I could set this up so that you guys could post links. Like, if you were to say, hey, and I have a question about this Prosonic, and here's the schematic. But if I do that, it's going to be not all sex bots and Nigerian princes and stuff. So it's not that I don't trust you guys. It's just the way of the body world. Thank you, Brian Felmeth. Can't talk today. Sorry, Brian Felmeth. Brian Felmeth, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Do the new eyelet boards that companies like Mojotone sell have the same potential for DC conductivity like the old Fender boards are prone to, or do they have a new composite to prevent those issues? As far as I know, the material is pretty much the exact same, and the potential is the same. You have to remember that potential, which is resulting in problems in the old Fender boards, that took 30, 40 years to exhibit. So if you're playing your Mojotone amp and 60 years from now, you need to go in there with some isopropyl to get the DC out. That's not terrible. Now, I have had brand new fiber boards that have had leakage, not specifically from Mojotone, but I've encountered that in relatively new amps from Victoria, among others. It is an issue. It is specifically, most commonly an issue, though, on amps which have the input grid stoppers mounted to the board. Now, every time I call those 68Ks in a Fender the grid stoppers, someone wants to actually me and say that those aren't grid stoppers, they're mixer resistors, because they're not mounted right at the tube socket, so therefore they can't be grid stoppers. They are the grid stoppers. They are the imperfectly located grid stoppers. If you want to mount them to the tube socket directly there at pin 2, and then have 2 wires going from there to the input jack, then they will be correctly located grid stoppers, but you'll have much more complicated wiring for them. They are only mixer resistors if you're using the low gain input. When you use the low gain input, they form a voltage divider, 68K, 68K, because the 1 meg is shunted to ground. So it's a voltage divider and a mixer resistor if you're using the low gain input. If you're using the high gain input, they're not a mixer resistor. They're in parallel with each other. There's a 1 meg resistor to ground. That's your grid leak, followed by a 34K, approximately, depending on the actual resistance, the two in parallel, mega resistor in line between the input jack and the grid of the tube. And if there was no wire and that was right there at the tube socket, that is the classic definition of a grid stopper. And it works as a grid stopper. If you want to take that same circuit and make it be a better grid stopper, add a 10K resistor right there at the socket in series with the existing 68Ks. And then you'll have a total of 44K. And no one is going to hear the difference between 44K and 34K. But if it matters to you, you can decrease the 68Ks to like 56K each. You're still going to get the approximately the same input impedance for the lower gain. You're going to get the same voltage divider, but then you'll have 56, so 42K with a 10K. Or you can lower that 10K to 4.7K. You can play around with it and make it as perfect as your little heart wants it to be. But in reality, the 10K is really not that necessary to add for a perfect grid stopper in a low gain amp like a Fender. And those resistors are not mixer resistors unless you are one of the statistical oddities who only uses the low gain input, in which case they're better viewed as a voltage divider than a mixer. The only time they're actually a mixer resistor is if you're using the low gain and the high gain input at the same time, which very few people do. It was designed that way back in the day, so you could have the singer and the accordion player and the bassist and the guitarist all plugged into one Fender Twin. And that's the amp for the entire band. And we don't really tend to do that very much these days anymore. That would be the situation where they would be mixer resistors. I love the well, actually, guys, I get. And I don't reply to them because life is too short. But, you know, I would think if I'm going online and I see a channel on a certain subject and they've got over 1,000 videos on that subject, and some of those videos, a lot of those videos are really in depth on that subject, I would think twice before automatically trying to correct them or, well, actually them. A lot of the times when I see those comments, they haven't really understood what was being said. You know, I can explain it to you. I can't understand it for you. Bless your heart. None of you guys are all subscribers. You guys are all legends. You guys are awesome. But it is hard not to. It's hard having to suffer fools. On the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. Let's see. Brian again. Follow. No, that's not Brian again. Brian again. I'm glad. I like the interaction, Brian. Follow up on the 6G3 build question. Other than jacks to V1, which leads would benefit from bothering with shielded cable? Traditionally, in a Fender, the input jacks to V1 and the volume pot to V1B or V2B, that is the question, depending on if it's a one-channel or two-channel amp, in your case with the 6G3. So the places where that typically makes the biggest difference is the input to the first triode and from the volume pot to the second triode. Pardon me. There are occasionally I have occasionally run into amps, Fender reverb amps, where there is a benefit to running a shielded cable from the reverb mixer stage where the 220 and 470K and 3.3 meg resistor and the 10 picofarad cap all joined together. To remove the wire from there going to V4B and to put a shielded wire there. It's not very common, but it can happen. But in general, you need to only worry about the first two triodes of a channel, and not always. You know, sometimes the main reason for I find myself replacing them, if it's an old amp where the old lines were just cloth covers, that cloth covered wire can become conductive and microphonic and brittle in its old age. And so there's a benefit to replacing it as long as I'm replacing it and we replace it with some shielded stuff. More commonly, I have to replace it with shielded wire because it's a 69 or later amp, and the old factory shielded stuff was such terrible quality that it is falling apart in chunks, and so it's time to replace that with some good shielded wire. But I've built amps using just red and yellow cloth covered like they did in 1964, and it works just fine, and it's quiet because there's not a lot of gain, and it's in a chassis which itself is a massive shield if everything's done right. Drawing a blank on Dr. Science. Dr. Demento is another story, however. Well, Dr. Science was a great thing that used to run on PBS. It was a short comedy skit. Ask Dr. Science. He knows more than you do. That's right. He was not a real doctor. Anyway, that was back in the 80s, I guess. Good Lord, I'm old. General ethos, what would be better, buying a Princeton or Deluxe Reverb reissue, or building either from a kit, i.e. Mojotone? I have soldering skills and have made a number of pedals, and we reworked 2 of my guitars. I cannot answer that because, and I don't doubt what skills you have, it could be much better for you to buy a kit, or you might end up like that guy who's got a 68 Camaro up on blocks in his front yard and it just stays there for 20 years up on blocks because something goes wrong and you never quite get it working right. So my suggestion would be, for instant success, the existing amp is the better, is the surefire way to get to a certain point. I'm not a big fan of giving the Fender company much money these days, so I would recommend buying used. But the second path, which I would recommend to you, if you economically can do this, is before you build a Princeton or Deluxe Reverb, which is a relatively complicated amp, get a Champ kit. Build a Champ kit. You could do it in 2 or 3 days. It's going to be inexpensive. You'll always have a use for it. And if it goes well, if everything goes swimmingly, then your skill set is ready to take on the more complicated amp. And if you have problems, if you run into big issues, you can probably struggle through and get something that works and is safe. And then you know that, no, okay, I'm glad I didn't tackle the bigger thing. I'll just buy the used reissue. So that would be my, without knowing you personally, without being able to ask you more probing questions about, do you know this? Do you know that? Do you know this? That would be my suggestion. Yeah, the silver face prices sadly have just gone up crazily in the past 3-4 years. They used to be $500-600 places, and even like the used reissues used to be $500 to $800, and the new ones were like $1,100. And a new 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue is like $1,700 this week, and for $100 more you can get a Sir. It's a little bit nuts. And that doesn't even include the world of used Sirs and used top hats. That top hat Club Royale 15 that I had up when my channel reached 10,000 views, 10,000 subscribers. That was a big watershed moment for me. I still remember it. Even better than 2K when I celebrated with a cold pizza. But I think the guy got that used top hat for $1,200, and it was an infinitely better amp than anything Fender's made since 1982. So, the good stuff is out there. You just may have to have less attachment to a certain logo or certain logos. Thank you, Greg G. I appreciate that. Well, it's either this or mow the yard. I'm kidding. It rained. I'm off the hook for a little bit. Blues tone is nicotine-stained fingers, isn't it? Well, you'd think that I would be much better at blues than I am. I can actually play the blues when I'm not on camera. I have got a terrible case of red light syndrome. Part of it is not even the playing; it's just I'm aware of how overweight I am, and I've got the tooth thing, and it's just I see all these young guys. All these young skinny guys in their tight-fitted T-shirts and everything's perfectly lit, and they look beautiful, and they sit down with their Strat, and they don't have to worry about, is their gut sticking out or do they have moobs? And I'm just so self-conscious. Being on video, you think the more people seem to like what I do, the less it would occur to me that any of this matters. But when I think, oh my God, 5,000 people may watch this tomorrow, I just kind of shrink up on myself. I play so much better when the damn camera's off. And, it's not that I'm like Eddie Van Halen when no one's looking, but, just that self-awareness. I can't escape it. Anyway, enough about me. Thank you, Daniel C. That's very nice of you. I appreciate that. You know, we are going out of town next month, and all this does help very much. I appreciate that. Martin Reed, well, you're being late because you're watching the Olympics. What the hell does Paris have to compete with me, man? Me? Paris? That little old podunk town? Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for joining us while you could, though, Martin. And Gooden's late because of a 4-month-old Lab Shepherd puppy. Ooh, 20 pounds already. Lab Shepherd mix. It's gonna be crazy for the first 3 years. Let's hope that they top out about 80 pounds. Otherwise, you're gonna have a 120-pound crazy 2.5-year-old. But it's a good reason to be late. Yeah, Jim Cox is saying the same thing I am. That puppy will be new for a couple of years. Let's see. Infections Man. What are my thoughts on glowy screen grids on plexis? It seems it would be commonplace looking at the load lines with the screen supply being near the same voltage as the anodes. I don't know what you mean by glowy screen grids. You have to remember that when you're measuring those things, that's a cold measurement. There's no or very little signal present. The screen moves quite a bit, as does the plate while you play. It's really not really a thing that you have to worry about. And the other thing, I don't want to go too far into it. It's not just the screen voltage. The screen voltage is important. There's a max voltage there, but it's also current. So you can say, oh, it's got this is the voltage, but this is also the current. So the current can change quite a bit more than you think, or than you might think. I'm not saying than you think. Dustin's got a 70 Catalina up on blocks. Well, someday. Hey, John Rayam. Do I recommend upping 6v6 grid stoppers value on a Blackface Deluxe if they push it hard often to reduce blocking distortion? I've not run into much blocking distortion there on a Deluxe Reverb. I don't think that's the right place to do it. I think if you're running the blocking distortion on a Deluxe Reverb and you're really pushing it, the fix would be to change the 100 nanofarad output coupling caps to 10 nanofarad. 10 nanofarad with 220K bias leaks, you're still going to have everything that you need to have for a guitar, but it's going to be a lot leaner, and the response below 100 hertz is going to drop down, as opposed to 100 nanofarad with 220, which is flat down to 7 hertz. So I would say the grid stoppers, you can increase it if you want to. You won't really hear much difference till you get to 10K. Pardon me. But the place to play around there would be both the coupling caps on the output, try 10 nanofarad, and maybe some cathode bypass caps earlier, change from 22 to 4.7. See what you think. Tips on buying a used late 60s Fender combo on Reverb. Have it sent to me first. Well, in a perfect world, but I'm so busy right now. I've got so many amps in progress. I'm always hesitant to accept more in until I know when certain ones are leaving, because I don't want people's amps just to sit here. I don't know that it's not feasible for everyone either. I've got some videos up showing amps getting inspected. And pretty much every 60s, 70s Fender video I have, you'll see part 1, initial inspection or evaluation. And that's pretty much what you should do as an owner as much as possible when you get the amp. Look through a bunch of my videos and see what I'm looking at. And maybe you'll see common things that you can check on. I wish the reverb listings commonly showed gut shots, good, clear pictures of everything in an amp before you buy. It's not something people demand, so it's not something people even know to provide. And so it's always kind of a crapshoot. All that said, as long as the transformers are original, what I would want out of a 60s Fender combo is I would want the transformers to be original, all the blue film Ajax caps to be original and accounted for, not all changed out for orange drops in 1978, 85. I would want to have hopefully the original cabinet in good shape. If it's been retolexed, that's fine. Just let me know. I wanted to make sure the baffle board didn't have any structural issues, and I'd like to know about the speakers. Everything else about that amp can be changed out with no tunnel difference, or no downside. But the transformers, the chassis to be in good shape, especially if it's like a 65, 66 with that pretty nickel plating that they did. I can change the pots, can be changed, the amp will sound the same. The resistors can be changed, the amp will sound the same. Those blue Ajax caps can be changed, but they don't need to be, and they sound so good. The transformers are the crucial bit. Let's see. Hey, David James, what's the most reliable 6v6 these days to handle the high plate voltage in a deluxe reverb? Now, that is the crux of the son of a bitch situation we find ourselves facing. The answer to that has always been this JJ 6v6S, but in the last couple of years, they've all started to go extremely microphonic in tubes, in tube amps and combo amps. And so I don't trust them. They fail too often, too frequently. The electroharmonics and tongue saw on paper can handle it. In practice, they don't always. JJ's got a new double mica spacer I've not tried yet, so that might be the answer to our prayers, but I've not tried one yet. I hope it's the answer. What I've been doing for the clients who trust me is that I've been putting in the electroharmonics because they're good. Of the current production stuff, they seem to last the best. I've had some issues with the TADs, but that might be a batch thing. I'm still researching that. And then I put in a 5U4GB instead of the GZ34. And if you notice that Fender did the same thing about 6970. Power transformers stayed the same. They changed the rectifier tube because wall voltage was going up, and wall voltage has continued to go up. And if you put in the 5U4GB, not the huge Coca-Cola bottle non-GBs, you get a decrease in the B plus and you get a decrease in the screen, and you can set it so that you're at 400 to 420 volts B plus. Your screens are going to be much happier. Your 6v6s are going to be much happier, and it's non permanent. It's reversible. You want to go back to a GZ34? Go for it. Put that in there. Reset the bias. Away you go. No mods. You're not adding any big 50-watt Zener, dropping diodes or MOSFET solutions or anything to bring down voltages. I would love it if JJ fixed the 6v6S, and I have high hopes for the new double mica spacer, but I've not tried it yet. I need to get some just for that reason. Which of the little vintage single-ended screamers do I like the best? Valco, Magnetone, Field Coils, etc. I'm not a big fan of any single-ended screamers. Of single-ended amps, I like the AC4 a little bit. I like the Vibro Champ more than I like the Tweed Champ. There's one, but I don't remember if it's single-ended or not. There was a Harmony, whose number I've forgotten. I don't remember. I don't think it was a funky amp that sounded glorious, but I don't think it was single-ended. But most single-ended amps are just cheap stuff for little Johnny to have under the Christmas tree, with no serious intent. Certainly not for Valco. And field coils, I'm so glad that we don't have to deal with field coils anymore. It's such an inefficient, weird design, and so expensive for no good reason these days. Sorry if I know that's not the answer you're hoping for, but I gotta be me. Hey, Sean Marr. Hey, I like orange drop caps. He's asked why are orange drops not my preference and what do I prefer in their place. But orange drop caps are not orange drop caps. There are a lot of different capacitors with different materials and construction methods which have the same orange epoxy coating. So a 220p or a 418 does not sound the same as a 715p or a 716p. The 715 and 716 are both polypropylene. The others are polyester. I think the 716's got copper leads versus steel. And you can use any of them that you like. My issue with orange drops as a construction method is that they are radial caps that we are fitting onto typically axial uses. So a fender board is designed with wide space with eyelets. That is ideal for an axial cap that's running this way. But a radial is the lead's supposed to go up and down, and so you bend them out to the side. And is there any stress there where the lead leaves the body of the cap? Are you going to crack the epoxy and let humidity in? They're physically very large with a lot of mass compared to other capacitors of the same rating. So there's a lot of vibrational issues there. They're very, very large. If you use a bunch of them, they all end up next to each other, whereas comparable axials might have an air gap between them, and those air gaps are really crucial for designing amplifiers that don't have weird intermodulation distortions and stuff. You can design an amp and build an amp with orange drops, any kind of orange drop you want, and have great results. But you have to take in a lot of things into account. If I were designing an amp to use orange drops, the first thing I would do is these are the orange drops I want to use, and these are the voltages and values I want to use, and these are the lead spacings. And then I would either design an eyelet board or a turret board or a PCB that had those lead spacings in mind so I could use them as radials, so all the leads go straight down as opposed to forcing them at right angles right where they leave the body of the cap. And I think a lot of techs just use them because they buy bags by the 100 because they'll use them in a guitar, they'll use them in an amp, whatever. It's just a knee-jerk reaction. And they do look prettier than Mallory 150M. But those are not the only choices out there. They're the choices most ill-stocked techs have, if that makes sense. So I think it's about time for us to start to wrap this up. I'll do this again next week, and I'm not sure about the week after that because we're planning on going out of town pretty soon. I like doing these things. And I always feel guilty when I don't get to everyone's questions. For some reason, miraculously, this time we've gotten almost everyone's question, except Rob Bass. We're going to ignore him. I'm kidding. We'll get to you. So far I've had 109 thumbs up, and I've had 1 thumbs down. And I'm going to tell myself that thumbs down was at the beginning when. Hey, come on in, Hal. Hal's here. Cool. It was at the beginning when the audio was going crazy. So let me get to Rob Bass, and then we're going to sign off for the week because Hal just brought me some lunch. Which company do I think makes the highest quality amps? Good design, specs, wiring, quality parts, clean layouts, clean solder joints. You're not asking me to burn any bridges or leave anyone out there. There's not a single one of the amps that I have a lot of experience with who are making amps today. I would say Sir Germino Friedman, first tier. Second tier, while I disagree with some of their choices, I cannot fault them as far as quality goes, and that would be Top Hat and Carr. I think that's about it. As far down that rabbit hole I want to go, because then I know that I'm going to leave someone out, And this is not the only list of great amps out there, but these are ones I think are really well worth pointing you to. You can't go wrong with any of those companies. And at that point, it's just a matter of playing them all and seeing which one speaks to you. On that note, I'm going to go have a Euro with my buddy Hal. You guys have a good week, and I'll try to come up with something besides pedal boards and redoing grounds for the 18,000th time.